Hey, digital world, welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. I'd ask you how your weekend went, but I'm sure it was pretty fantastic because Barbie and Oppenheimer are out, and from what I know, literally everybody in the world has gone to see it. Some people, even crazily, on the same day, doing a double feature, doing a Barbenheimer, and I'm absolutely loving it. I think the greatest thing that has come out of this whole thing is not the meme of such two vastly different movies being released on the same day. It's not that both of them were actually really, really good movies that lived up to the hype and will probably go down as the greatest movies of all time, but the positivity around the whole thing. When it was coming up, I was worried that it was really going to be either you like Barbie or you like Oppenheimer. It's pitting the two against each other. It's picking one side over the other. And to be fair, there are people online that are doing that. The amount of Barbie reviews I've seen from white males on the internets, which start with, I don't like it, but I'm not the target audience, but I have to say how I feel, is annoying. And the same for Oppenheimer, which is like, it's too boring and dull. It's trying to be too clever. I just want a movie, not an essay or something stupid like that. For the most part, that's a very mainly small group of people. But I thought it would be much larger. What I'm loving is just the genuine joy of these two movies being released together and the support behind both of them. Whether it's Barbie being a cultural icon phenomenon that's empowering for women and a really funny, entertaining film, or Oppenheimer being this very dark, depressing analyzation of this most horrible thing in history, but done in a way that makes it a riveting cinematic experience. It's not you have to like one or the other, or you have to go and see one or the other, or we have to hope that this one makes more money than the other one. People are just genuinely celebrating being back at the theaters and going to see these movies, and that's wonderful. I'm loving it. Depending how the strike goes, it may be the last movies you see for quite some time. You never know. But if that's where we have to leave things for a while, I'm happy about it. As such, we'll have to think of some new content to do on here that's not necessarily movie reviews. I'm sure there'll be a couple I'll be able to do, but just in case, we'll go back to some of our old regular favorite series here on Spliced In Later. And I realized while getting ready for this episode that one particular series that I haven't checked in on in quite some time is our analysis of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you're unfamiliar with this channel or this Spotify or whatever you're listening to, what we do is we go way back through the early days of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, way back from Iron Man in 2008, and we just knock off each installment in this franchise as we move along to eventually an intersection point, because at the same time, I review the new MCU stuff that's coming out, which at the moment is plentiful. It's all over Disney Plus and it's all in the cinemas. So there's plenty on both sides to do. It's no secret that it is my favorite franchise. It's had its ups and downs, but for the most part, I really love, as I've said many times before, how this world has been built and structured and operates in a way where you have all these interconnecting stories and characters that can also stand on their own for separate adventures and then culminate in big intersecting grand scale stories. According to my records, the last time I checked in for an MCU update was my review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in May, which means that's over 2 months ago, going on 3. If we go further back than that, it was actually nearly 4 months ago when I talked about Daredevil, which is crazy. I don't know why it's been so long. It's possible because there's been plenty of movies to review, which is rare for this show because it started right when the pandemic hit, so we didn't have time or content to be doing regular reviews. It could also be that I decided to do a bit of a Christopher Nolan segue analysis as the countdown for Oppenheimer. But it could also be that at this stage, the MCU is a bit up in the air at the moment. What's going on with it, what's happening, and what the results will be for the future. The reception of the most recent stuff that come out, with the exception of probably Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, has been very average to negative. and people are putting it down to too much content, less quality in the products actually being made, more factory-based products coming out rather than actual dedicated stories that are being told, or a bunch of other million different reasons. And as someone who really loves the MCU, I have to agree that it is a bit more difficult than it used to be. Whether it's something like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which was built to be this big pivotal moment to launch Phase 5 or whatever we're up to at the moment, and just being a so-so film. Or the most recent Disney Plus TV show, Secret Invasion, which finishes this week, which means next week's episode will be my reaction to that. But at the moment, I'm finding that in itself to be a tough watch, which is a first for me. I've never struggled with an MCU product. Not in a bad way, it's not bad. I just find it very unengaging and a bit lackluster and dull. But we'll get into that next week. Who knows? This last episode may make the whole thing completely different in my eye, which is why I wait until the end of the shows before I really comment on them, because you don't really have the full story, especially with these Disney Plus movies turned into TV shows sort of things. Anyway, that's for next week. But at the same time, I do think as well, in terms of sensationalism for online stuff, everybody's got to get those clicks on the YouTube videos. Everybody loves to say that the MCU is in shambles and it's falling apart and it's a complete disaster compared to what it was, and no one knows what they're doing or what's going on. And while some of those opinions may be valid, I think it's foolish to believe that everything that came before Avengers Endgame was this completely perfect, definitive, packaged story, completely thought out and built out right from the very beginning of Iron Man over that 11-year period. That could not be further from the truth. We've already discussed it in part of our Phase 1 stuff, but the MCU in those early days was just the potential of getting to the Avengers. It was not, we've got this 10-year plan. It was just trying to see if these characters could work together. Then you got into Phase 2, and then there was still some more, we're not exactly sure what we want to do yet. We have an idea of where we want to go, but we don't know which characters we're going to introduce. We have to do obligatory sequels because we're not confident enough to focus on new characters. We need to bring in the old characters that have the success at the box office. Meaning that in the middle point, which we're up to here in this MCU retrospective, there was, in my opinion, something which is what people are noticing now, which was a bit of a misfire, a misdirection. I'd call it a near miss, something that was made for money without necessarily being thought out and part of an intricate process of this Infinity Saga. Today we're talking about Avengers: Age of Ultron. Now, even though it's Avengers movie, I have to say it is one of my least favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe things. It's still an enjoyable movie. I still like watching it. I still have fun with it. But when you look at everything else that came out before it and everything that came out after, it is lacking in a lot of ways. And it sums up what I think the MCU is struggling with now, which is knowing what they want the end of the story to be, but not planning out or having an idea set in motion for how they want to get to that point. And so basically just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And that's hard enough on its own when you're just making a movie about Ant-Man or Thor or Black Panther or whatever. When you are making an Avengers movie and you have so many characters and you plan to introduce a brand new villain that has not been hinted or built up in any previous movie beforehand, while pretty much just trying to put things in motion for a future Avengers film that is coming up later, and you have yourself a bit of a confusing, frustrating mess, which is what Avengers: Age of Ultron is. However, it's also a lesson in how things are not always perfect, but things can pivot and reset and react to reception and things that do work and don't work, and then pivot in the right direction. So way back in 2015, Avengers: Age of Ultron, the hype around it is probably 10 times what it was when the Avengers 2012 came out. The Avengers when that first came out was the marvel that all these characters were going to be in the same movie. And not only were they in the same movie, but they worked together. Avengers Age of Ultron had to bring all these characters back together while adding some new Avengers, because you've got to add new characters, taking on a brand new villain, and then putting everybody in a place to then proceed into their next set of movies. Because by the time Age of Ultron came out, Captain America 3 was still coming, Thor 3, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Ant-Man 2, rumblings of a Spider-Man movie coming. So there was still a lot ahead, but they had to try and top the original Avengers. So what happens in Age of Ultron, if for some maddening reason you decide you want to watch this movie and not any other MCU movie, basically it kind of picks up some loose threads from other movies, most specifically Captain America the Winter Soldier, but not really. You can pick this up and just sort of watch the movie without any prior knowledge of what's come before, which I will admit is getting increasingly difficult today with all the Disney Plus shows you got to watch, but that's another point entirely. So basically, when the movie kicks off, the Avengers are all together because they're hunting down Hydra, all these Hydra bases that are threatening the world. But during this escapade, Tony Stark, wonderful Iron Man, played by Robert Downey Jr., has been haunted by visions of and PTSD from the alien invasion from their last Avengerscape. I just tried a word there that didn't work. So his goal is to put a contingency plan in place to protect the Earth. So it's not always the Avengers. They need something to basically put a shield around the Earth and bounce out any aliens that would dare invade. He foolishly finds Loki's scepter in a Hydra base with the Infinity Stone, the Mind Stone in it. He doesn't know it at the time. But seeing there's a consciousness in there, he works with Bruce Banner to create Ultron. Ultron is supposed to be the ultimate defender of Earth. Naturally, they're successful, but as any Terminator movie or any robot movie will warn you, the first thing the robot does once it gains sentient knowledge, decides the best way to protect the planet is to just wipe out humanity. Humanity is the greatest threat to the Earth, most specifically the Avengers. So Ultron has got a super mind. He takes out Tony's AI Jarvis. He starts piloting all of Tony's Iron Man suits, Iron Man drones, whatever they are, turns them in his own mini Ultrons, and sets about on an ultimate plan to wipe out humanity. And so the Avengers, while getting their butts handed to them, while fracturing a bit because they don't trust each other, eventually have to unite and come together and stop Ultron. Ultron, at the same time, has manipulated two superpowered beings, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, to help him in his escapades, who eventually will realize, actually, this guy's evil. And thrown into the mix as well is the new super android Jarvis Ultron hybrid called Vision. So beefing up the Avengers from your very reasonable 6 in the first film to a solid 9. And that's discounting cameos from War Machine and Falcon and Nick Fury and all the supporting players from the previous movies. Now, Avengers Age of Ultron, to give it some positive stuff, what's great about it is that all these characters still work so well together. It's great that they have their own franchises and they have their own personalities that are strong enough to have their own stuff. But when they all come together, they somehow, I don't know whether it's whoever's directing them, just gets lucky with these actors. They know how to play off each other and not hog the spotlight. Regardless of how big a star Robert Downey Jr. is or how hot Thor is, when they're together, no one is stealing the spotlight from one another. They have really good banter. They have a really interesting connection. They act like you've been watching them in movies together for 20 years, even though it's really only their second time that a lot of them are hanging out, especially for someone like Hawkeye, who only ever shows up for the Avengers films. Hawkeye, by the way, actually got some development and some understanding of who he is as a character, which had been very lacking from his previous MCU appearances. Ultron was an interesting villain. I liked his portrayal by James Spader. I thought he had a really interesting way of portraying Ultron as kind of like Tony's swarmy personality inside a robot who is reasonable while he's being unreasonable It was a very interesting thing, and I liked it. I knew James Spader would be good from the moment they announced he was going to be Ultron. And I knew Ultron was a very iconic Avengers villain, so I was excited to see him in the movie. And I think Age of Ultron, for all its faults, is the one movie that sells the idea that all of these Avengers are friends. That's the thing that I think lacks in something like Civil War or Infinity War, where you have this manufactured antagonistic relationship between Tony and Steve, Iron Man and Captain America, with their eventual friendship breakdown and the idea that they were the best of friends that had been driven apart in a way that irrevocably changes them and they can no longer be the team that they once were. But in a lot of cases, all these movies are separate. They're not crossing over. The big names certainly don't jump into each other's movies, because the idea of the selling point is you can't have Captain America have a defining moment in Thor 2 and then come back in Captain America 3 and be different than what he was in Captain America 2. There needs to be that some sort of lineage for people who wildly would only watch the Captain America films. So because of that, often that for me felt like, okay, you're telling me that they're the best of friends, but I haven't really seen it. Age of Ultron tries to sell that to you, and it mostly succeeds. Even if it's something as simple as the beginning of the movie where they take out all the Hydra bases and celebrate with a party in Avengers Tower, and you have all the different characters and all their side characters just hanging out, just having drinks, getting Stan Lee drunk, trying to lift Thor's hammer as a drinking game. It's genuinely like, okay, these guys are friends. They're really good friends. They work well together. They have each other's back. I can see it in this movie. I think Age of Ultron is the one movie that really sells that concept. Where Age of Ultron fails and was almost a misfire for the MCU is its odd attempt at trying to cram too much into too little with more focus on the future rather than the present. Thanos worked in Infinity War because he had so much development in Infinity War. They made sure to make sure he was the main character of that film. They developed him. But he also had the benefit of being hinted at through previous cameo appearances. They didn't have to be much, but you knew of his threat, of him as this unseen, hulking individual that was coming. Ultron was created, introduced, threatened, and defeated all in the space of 2 hours. And I think for something in Avengers film, if you want a villain, either you have to push the Avengers aside and focus on the villain to give them that development, to make them an interesting character and someone that you are genuinely afraid of, to make it work, or you introduce them in previous movies to allow that to already be developed by the time you get to that point, a la knowing who Loki is in Thor before he starts causing mischief in the Avengers. Aside from that, you have the previous 6 Avengers all coming back, all having their own different storylines and personalities and things going on, plus introducing 3 brand new superheroes with Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Vision. And you have a very jam-packed movie with a lot going on, which, on the side of it all, isn't really that concerned with the movie itself as a lasting impact on the MCU. Obviously, plans were to fracture the Avengers, but not until Civil War, so none of that happens here. Ultron, you got to get him off the table because you want Thanos to come. Obviously, there was no plans for Thanos to show up until the final Avengers films, so there was okay, we got to do something for the second one. Oh, I guess we'll have Ultron. We don't seem to have that much for Bruce and Black Widow to do in this movie. Okay, they have a romance now. And then you can see as well, there's the outside interference of, we want people to be excited for the future film. So we need these scenes in here of just the Avengers having visions of the future, of the Infinity Stones. Thor goes on a whole side quest where he goes and have a bath in a cave somewhere and has a vision of Infinity Stones, which in the end as well didn't lead to anything, because by the time he got to Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi was just like, I'm not doing that, I'm doing my own thing. Thank God he did, because we got Thor Ragnarok. So when you go back and you watch all these movies, you can see how it's more of a mess. It's not exactly clear to anyone involved, I think, actors, directors, whoever was doing it, what Age of Ultron would mean in the grand scheme of things. So as a result, it detracts from that overall experience. And I think even people watching it in 2015 got that sense as well when they were watching it. Exciting movie. Great to see the Avengers all together again. Cool that they're taking on Ultron. I like Ultron. I like Vision. I like all these new characters. But this does not feel as important and impactful as the first Avengers. And it doesn't feel like this is important viewing for future events. It does seem like we have to make an Avengers 2 because we need a trilogy. Or at the end of the day, 4 films, because Infinity War and Endgame became parts 3 and 4. But whatever. This is beside the point. So at the end of the day, when I go back and I watch Age of Ultron, normally the only way I can really enjoy it and get something out of it is if I put it in an MCU viewing marathon. And even then, getting to that point for me is when I generally struggle. And it's not because sometimes when I do this foolishly, I'm always like, maybe I can stay up and watch all of it without sleeping, which means by the time I get to Age of Ultron, it's like 3 a.m. The last time I tried to do this, I actually made it all the way to Thor Ragnarok, I think. Completely uninterrupted viewing. That's 2 full days. And Ragnarok, my head was violently collapsing into my chest because I just had not gotten any sleep. Age of Ultron for me is a bit of a blur. If I remember correctly, Guardians wakes me up around midnight, but then you got Age of Ultron, which is just a lot happening and none of it's really that important. So I just sort of lose interest. And then Ant-Man for a 5 a.m. viewing, not a great idea. But it's also a cautionary tale because some could argue back in 2015, Age of Ultron is the sign that things are getting stale. They don't know what they're doing. There's too much going on, too many characters, too many movies. This is it for the MCU. And then within a year's time, you had Civil War, which was one of the best and most successful Marvel Cinematic Universe films, leading into great films like Guardians 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, new movies with new characters, all great, all successful, and all important to the Infinity War saga, which we eventually got to later on. So Age of Ultron did not signal the end of the MCU, not by a long shot. There were cracks showing. You could tell things weren't properly cemented at the time, but the people behind it course corrected. They threw out what they didn't need. They improved on what they did. They made Scarlet Witch and Vision proper characters in future installments. They never really tried to bring Ultron back because he didn't work, so they focused on Thanos. And you have a dipping point in one of the most successful sagas of all time. So I take that when I look at what's going on now. When you have the lackluster attitudes to Thor Love and Thunder or Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, or the less interest in the constant Disney Plus TV shows, I understand that. I don't dispute it. I do think this is the chance for the people behind the scenes to do what they do with Age of Ultron and course correct, whether that's pulling back the Disney Plus TV shows, not having so many of them, with the movies themselves, not having focused on 3 or 4 movies a year. If you just release 1 movie a year, that's fine, as long as that movie is really solid in everything. The story, the importance, the visual effects, everything. It's not so much that we need constant MCU content. It's just that we need quality MCU content. And who knows, with the strike on at the moment, it's not like they can work on new stuff. And it does seem like steps are being taken. Course corrections, much like Age of Ultron, are being made, whether it's slowing down the Disney Plus releases, delaying some Marvel movies, allowing time to focus on what should be made, what shouldn't be made, what can be a good movie, what doesn't have to be a TV show. And who knows, we may get to the end of the multiverse saga where they kick Kang the Conqueror's ass and it's a grand spectacle and we all love it. And we look back on the multiverse saga and we go, man, wasn't that a great MCU story? And we can look back at this little chunk of it and go, it wasn't that great here, but in retrospective, it was a dip in an otherwise solid saga. I can't see the future. I don't know if that will be the result. But I'm not about at this point to give up on it because things aren't working in a certain way or aren't as good as they used to be. I'm allowing the benefit of the doubt to learn as you go and hoping that they can do like they did with Age of Ultron, tweak it, fix things up, and get back on track. If you want my stars for Age of Ultron, I give it a 6 out of 10. I think I still like it. I still enjoy it. It's just, if someone was told me rank the MCU from worst to best, Age of Ultron is always right down the bottom in the real bottom stuff. And not really to do with anything wrong with the acting or the directing or anything about it. It's just, it was, in my opinion, an unthought out, unnecessary middle point in an otherwise great installment. And I think in retrospective, it's worth taking that look on what's happening now. And we'll see what happens as time goes. There, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Sorry to do this, but next week we'll have more MCU when I review or at least discuss Secret Invasion, once that completes on Disney Plus next week. Also, I have my tickets for Meg 2 The Trench, so at least there's one more movie I'll be able to review for you. I don't know when, because it's very funny. I got the email from the cinemas telling me, Meg 2 tickets are on sale, secure yours today. So I was like, okay, cool. And I opened it up, and each cinema here in my hometown of Canberra only has like one showing a day at 9:30 at night. So I guess there's just not much room in this world for a big old shark chasing down Jason Statham, where you've got to put Barbie and Oppenheimer and Mission Impossible and everything else in all the other screenings. Which is fun. I think I understand that. From a marketing point, I don't think you need to put that much real estate for the Meg 2. From a personal standpoint, I wish I didn't have to go see a movie at 9:30 at night. I'm an old man and I like my sleep. But I bought my ticket, so at some point during that week as well, you'll get your Meg 2 review, whether you want it or not. So until next week, I love and appreciate you. As always, thank you very much for listening. It does mean the world to me. Thank you for enduring as I go on more MCU rants. There'll be more to come. I feel like I'll be prioritizing these a bit to make up for all the ground lost over the last few months. Or I won't. I really don't know. You'll just have to listen and wait and find out for yourself. But until then, I love and appreciate you as always. Stay safe, stay kind to one another. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.